Going into this episode, we pretty much knew that not everyone was going to come away happy with this. There has been a lot of debate on what should be considered with God of War scaling. There's a reason that the meme while this episode was in production was God of Lore versus Asura's feats. Well, there was also the meme where people would say that this fight was a fight between two perfectly reasonable fathers, which I think every single Death Battle YouTuber got a comment like that at some point. So when thinking about how Death Battle should approach this, they really needed to justify what feats they use and be a little bit careful on how they approach lore feats. To be honest, I wasn't sure how they could make this battle appeal to both sides. I mean, I'm sure with enough creativity, you could create a battle that captures the fast-paced and powerful feel of Asura's Wrath and the slower, more thought-out combat of God of War. But it would be a very hard task to accomplish. Enough stalling though. How was the episode overall? Let's start with Kratos' analysis. Right off the bat, we get a black box that clarifies that alternate material and creator statements are only being used as long as it supports the greater source material. There's a lot of statements made by Cory Balrog that people would use to discredit Kratos, so it's good we get this right away so we know their logic in the episode. They start by going over how the Greek world was created, how the clash between two gods started the Greek universe, and how everything was created with violence, before laying down the fact that the god that created the universe lost to his son Kronos, who then lost to Zeus, who then lost to Kratos. It's fine and sound logic in the episode, setting up the fact that there are 4 characters with escalating powers and Kratos is the strongest of them all. Now there are caveats to this, but I'll get into my little nitpicks when I get into the conclusion. I want to bring up that it says dislike Sackboy in the background tab, and this is because of a Robot Chicken commercial for PlayStation All-Stars where Sackboy beats up Nathan Drake and Kratos. This really brings me back. I love PlayStation All-Stars. They start going over Kratos' story, talking about his deal with Ares and accidentally killing his family, before showing a list of all of his weapons and talking about his Greek-specific abilities, which he doesn't have anymore since the Greek realm is dead, but that's such a small nitpick. They talk about how he kills Helios and forced Kronos to hold up the cosmos by overpowering him. Even though the text they show doesn't exactly say cosmos, I think the logic still stands. Having the speed feat be based off the shockwaves that created the universe is really funny, but I'm sure it upset a lot of people seeing as I saw this feat contested so much during the waiting period. The Blade of Olympus I felt would be a major factor in this fight, since I also agreed that it should be able to siphon energy like Mantra. They finish off his Greek story by talking about how he released hope into the world, only after killing it. They then go into his Norse story, and I can't help but feel like we're missing something. I think they should have skipped including going over his Greek weapons and abilities, and included a scene talking about his relationships with the other gods who weren't Ares or Zeus. They didn't bring up his brother Deimos, they didn't talk about his relationship with Aphrodite, and we didn't even hear anything about how Hermes or Hercules were his half-brothers. I think clarifying these familial bonds would have done a lot to clarify his relationships with the gods, and the atrocities he's wrought. They talk about his Norse story quite well though. I don't know why they can't just say the name Atreus, but they cover the relationship between him and Kratos. Alright, look, I do have some problems with this. They do bring up later that he became a better father, but part of the juxtapositions for Kratos and Asura is that they love unconventionally. Kratos starts off really harsh towards Atreus before letting him see his more honest sides later in the games. And Asura, without the use of a better term, neglects Mithra because he loves her, but he just doesn't know how to show it. I think this was an important note to hit, and I'm a bit upset that it's absent from this episode. In any case, they go over the Leviathan axe and the Draupnir spear very well, saying that they can cut and destroy souls. They talk about his Spartan rage, which can heal him and make him stronger, and how he has abilities to warp space and time, all of which would seemingly give him advantages over Asura. What I find most interesting is this Ragnarok feat. They say that Freyr was able to hold off Ragnarok for a good amount of time and that Freyr is comparable to Kratos, so Kratos should be capable of this feat too, clarifying that Ragnarok could shake Yggdrasil, which is the tree that transcends space and time that the Norse world was created from. From this analysis, you can see why people wouldn't like Kratos in a versus debating sense. Everything comes off as someone else did this feat and Kratos beat them, so Kratos should be able to do the same feats. Although I really like how we get explanations of both the creations of the Greek and Norse worlds, just to truly show how separated they are. They finish off by talking about how Kratos is truly the god of hope now, and most importantly, how he fought Shovel Knight to a standstill, which is the best feat here if you ask me. This analysis was good, but I think it lacks certain characters and relationships that would have helped define and explain Kratos' character and motivations. They did a serviceable job, but they could have done more. Now, onto Asura. Asura's analysis starts with the same message that Kratos' did, that supplementary material and creator statements will only be used if it's backed by the main source material. I guess that means that they aren't letting Asura have things like reviving in seconds and fighting without his core. We find out immediately that Asura is over 12,000 years old, meaning that when it comes to battle experience? Asura definitely takes that category. Also, I find it really cute that Chad is still referencing Power Rangers after all these years. Never change, man. They go over Asura's story really well. Like, everything I wanted in Kratos' rundown was in Asura's. They cover Asura's relationships with the other guardian deities and how he hated that they used people's lives to power themselves up, specifically citing that one girl who died that reminded Asura of his daughter. They make his relationship with Yasha important, specifically saying they are bros again, which they didn't specifically clarify, but Yasha and Asura have always been close, even before they were brothers-in-law, I believe. Most importantly though, they talk about how he loves Mithra but doesn't know how to show it, which connects to who he is as a person. Asura may look like a cyborg that uses his own wrath to power up the mantra within him to brutally fight the Goma, but inside he's not just someone who fights for the hell of it. Mithra was a lot to Asura. Even though she was someone who can amplify Asura's powers and make mantra more powerful, she was still his daughter. In essence, he was the only one in that whole army who didn't want to use her as a weapon. Like they say in the episode, Asura isn't some one-dimensional anger machine. He's a protector first, and a father and husband second. Someone who would even climb out of Naraka and deny his own death to protect the people in the world that he cares about. They know Asura as a character. They showed that off in this analysis. I mean, the guy literally fought God because they made his daughter cry. I mean, he also had other reasons, like protecting everyone else on Gaia, but the point still stands. Apart from that, we learn about Asura's other forms, like the Vajra, Mantra, Wrath, and Destructor forms. It's nice that we got to see them all and learn about their, for the most part, very minor differences. But I want to note two things about the Wrath form. The first thing is that Asura does not lose complete control in this form. They clarify that in the episode. And the second is the black box that states that the mantra reactor essentially stops the Wrath form from happening anymore. Note that second part for later. Lastly, they talk about Asura fighting Ryu, even though I think fighting Akuma is a much better feat to use. And they talk about the speed of the laser that was heading towards Gaia. And wow, that's a very similar speed feat to Kratos's. So now we know that Asura will take the experience category and the speed category will be tied. It's a little interesting that they didn't bring up a strength feat at all for Asura, and I'm sure that doesn't matter too much. Let's just move on to the fight. We start off with Kratos being a little sulky, you know, living with past mistakes and all that, before randomly being teleported to Gaia, appearing in front of Mithra and some soldiers. Is this an ability Mithra has? Did Chakravartin do this as a test? Who knows? Kratos appears with all of his weapons and kills the soldiers. Asura runs up and apparently just knows who Kratos is? I think the idea is that Asura is still working with the 8 Guardian Generals, and they fed him information about Kratos to trick him. Seeing as Asura says, "So it's true," as soon as he walks up to Kratos. It's an interesting setup, but honestly, it's really hard to justify these two fighting in the first place, so it's fine. Asura charges at Kratos, and we get the first "thank God it's changed" line in the episode. Asura says in the storyboards in the trailer of this episode, "Death to all gods" here. And I can't believe after how good his analysis is that they would mischaracterize him that badly. Anyways, Kratos swings at Asura and Asura jumps back. Kratos throws the Leviathan axe and Asura deflects it. We then get this alright looking punch shot. I think it just looks a little too stiff and moves a little too slow for my liking. The storyboards have this scene play out a little differently, where Asura jumps over the axe and the punch clash ends with them punching each other in the face and getting knocked back. I like the episode version of the knockback better, seeing as it's a reference to how Kratos moves large boxes in the old God of War games. Just a satisfying little kick. Kratos then recalls his axe and Asura shows his speed by powering up, which looks really good by the way, and outspeeds the recall of the Leviathan axe to punch Kratos hard. I wish we got the storyboard version of the scene where Asura outspeeds the axe while it's still in the air and not while it was still on the ground, but it's not a big deal. Kratos then gets hit with a fast flurry of punches before letting out his rage, which knocks Asura back. They then grab and push against each other, which makes the ground split. And this is my main issue with some of the choreography. I hate references where it's just, we couldn't use this character, so we'll use this one instead. They couldn't use Baldur, so they just used Asura here. It happens here and immediately after when Kratos is recovering from the building collapsing around him. A really bad looking Asura's Wrath QTE pops up on screen before Asura shows he turned into his Vajra form with a large punch. The storyboards have a worse version of this scene, where the QTE pops up and Asura hits Kratos with small jabs while they're still pushing towards each other. This version just doesn't feel right. The QTE is meant for large impacts, not small punts. So Devil Artemis? Good change. But here's the second example of what I was talking about earlier. Kratos, after getting punched, grabs a pillar and hits Asura with it. Just like the Baldur fight, wow. That's 2 scenes where they replace Baldur with Asura. Anyways, Asura shows his insane speed by appearing behind Kratos and blitzing him in the air. This is another change I like better in the episode. The storyboards have Asura fly around Kratos and juggle him in the sky, which just isn't how Asura fights. Asura hitting Kratos with some heart attacks before slamming him back into the ground feels so much more in character. Although Asura responding "shut up" to Kratos when he's essentially telling Asura to settle down does feel a little out of character. Kratos hits Asura with the Blades of Chaos, finally bringing out a more lethal weapon, and swings Asura around the stage and slams him into the ground with a fiery explosion. Then Kratos takes out the Draupnir spears to make more fiery explosions, even though the spear has wind magic. A bit weird they did this, seeing as the storyboard shows them using the spears right, but the end result is the same. Asura gets mad and starts shooting mantra blasts at Kratos, which Kratos deflects back at Asura. This scene is so creative and cool. Too bad the mantra effects look like ass. Asura then raises himself into the air and turns into Mantra Asura. Finally, we get the form that defeated Vlitra. This level of power is going to look so amazing. Asura just shoots more bad looking mantra blasts and gets one shot by Kratos. Is Kratos even trying in this fight? He's just no-selling Asura and knocking him around like he's a ragdoll. The storyboards have a really bad scene that the episode makes better, and the episode has a really bad scene that's absent from the storyboards. In the storyboards, Asura attempts to fight Kratos with no arms, which, like everyone who watches me knows, is something I really wanted, before falling into the hole in the ground that they made earlier with their clash. Asura recalls Mithra's cry, gets really angry, and turns into Destructor Asura. Asura then punches down at Gaia while Kratos defends it, with the back half of Gaia being destroyed by the force of Asura's punches. What the fuck? That is so out of character that it makes me think the person who wrote the episode and the person who wrote the analysis are two different people. What happened to him always controlling his anger? We should be glad we didn't get that in the full episode. But what we did get isn't much better. Asura just falls into the pit immediately after his arms are destroyed. He then sees Mithra crying, calling out to Asura, and it makes Asura so mad that he turns into his wrath form, which is the only form that doesn't get any introduction text, I might add. This scene is bad for so many reasons. For one, it goes against their research since they say Asura shouldn't be able to go into this form after he gets the mantra reactor. This form doesn't do anything for the fight, and the biggest problem is Mithra's presence in this episode. Why is she here? To give Asura a reason to fight? Couldn't they have done that without her being present? She does nothing but harm this episode by being here. I mean, this one scene where she's calling out to Asura is legitimately funny looking, which I don't think that was their intention. Not only that, but Asura is mad because Kratos made Mithra cry? Bitch, you started this fight. She wouldn't be crying if you weren't losing. In any case, Asura blasts Kratos with mantra, leading to that dimension breaking and opening up an entrance into the place between realms in God of War Ragnarok. How and why did Asura do this? Not to quote Ragnar vs. Soul Bad Guy, but nobody knows. Asura then looks charred from his wrath form, gets frozen, breaks out of the ice, and is one shot by Kratos again. My man, Kratos, at least pretend you are trying. Hell, scratch yourself with your own blade to make it look like Asura is hurting you even a little bit. Don't hurt this man's pride this badly by no-selling everything. Asura now turns into his Destructor form in an amazing looking part of this animation. This scene has scale. It has power, and best of all, it lets Asura use his full power without destroying Gaia. Surely Kratos will struggle now, maybe even get harmed. Nope, they just recreate the scene with Wyzen and Asura's wrath but put Kratos in the spot of Asura, even having Kratos yell at the fist above him, which doesn't fit his character at all. Kratos is then able to hold Asura's fist with one arm effortlessly and send Asura backwards with a single punch. Kratos then yells at Asura and refers to him as a titan, which is a sign of respect from Kratos, but it seems like they were trying to show that Kratos is reverting back to his Greek ways by having his voice change and showing he enjoys this fight by smiling, which feels so out of character and makes me hate this sequence. Kratos throws a spear that drastically grows in size for some reason, and Asura is then pinned down by the spears while Kratos climbs all the way to Asura's head, which is a scene I really like actually. Kratos then impales Asura in the head with the Blade of Olympus. They then fall back down to Gaia, where we see Asura is now impaled in the chest and his arms are missing? A lot must have happened on their way down. Kratos then says you are a monster no longer, which works for storyboard Asura, who destroyed his entire planet because he'd be angry, but it doesn't work for episode Asura at all. Asura tells Kratos that he never was a monster, which I'm pretty sure was supposed to make Kratos feel bad because he compared himself to Asura earlier, but this whole exchange is bad and does nothing for me. Kratos then leaves Asura with the Blade of Olympus still in his chest, but then turns around to see Mithra holding Asura, which is a scene I really like actually, but I think my ending was a bit better. So I write my own versions of these fights before the episodes come out because I find it fun. Will I ever post them? Hell no, I'm embarrassed. But for this episode, I'll let you in on this one scene. In my version, similar to the episode, I have Asura get depowered by the Blade of Olympus, but before he dies, Asura tells Kratos that he needs to save his daughter from the gods and that he can't stand to hear her cry anymore. Kratos then gets up after Asura fades away completely. He turns around and looks into the sky, seeing the space fleet of the gods right above him, and readies his blades to fight another pantheon. You can still get those emotional beats, but have it feel way more in character and not have unfitting dialogue that takes people away from the experience. Overall though, this fight is only okay. It looks impressive when you don't know the characters well, but when you step back and really look at everything, it's pretty mediocre. One thing that isn't mediocre is the song, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. It sounds very unconventional for Death Battle, but I think it works really well for this episode. They wanted something that feels emotional, and I think this song works really well, even though it sounds more like a God of War song admittedly. Anyways, what scenes did I think needed to be added to this episode? I think it would be really cool to see Kratos start to slow down time to hit Asura, just for Asura to break through it and dodge Kratos' attacks. I know they think that the time stops work differently, but Asura did sort of resist Chakravartin's time control to overpower his time stop. And I think even if they believe what they say in their conclusion, it would have been a scene that both fan bases would love. Number 2. This is actually a scene I wish they got rid of, and that's both the scenes with Asura's wrath forms. There's no point in them being here if Asura has the mantra reactor, and in general, I'd like to see a better fight scene with the mantra Asura form. And lastly, just give us the damn scene where Asura is fighting with no arms. And I mean more than what we got in the storyboards. Asura has his whole moveset based on just his legs and his head, so we could have gotten such a fun scene here. Let's move on to the conclusion. I was so sure when they said, "Are we sure this is how it would go?" that it was about to cut back to the fight and have Asura survive to take the win. Alas, we have a conclusion that I think is correct, but is just really weird. A lot of people don't like how they calc Kratos' speed, and I can kinda see why. Asura's speed is calced to about the same as Kratos' based on the speed of the sky laser compared to the primordial shockwaves. They said that Kratos scaled to Helios, and their logic makes sense, but not for the reasons they say it does. Scaling Kratos to Helios is fine when you read the black box and see that Atlas had caught Helios and Kratos could fight Atlas. But Kratos has never dodged Helios' light, and Helios' speed itself wouldn't necessarily be the same as the speed of his light. But characters like Hermes and Hercules are more comparable to Helios' light, with Hermes being able to outspeed it, and Kratos beat Hermes. Granted, Hermes did get weakened by Kratos beforehand, so he wasn't at full speed, but I still think it's fine to compare them in a sense. But you can see from this feat, it's Asura can do something versus Kratos should be able to do something. It's really hard to justify that idea to a more hardcore audience. Just remember though that the speed feat comes from the shockwaves the Primordials made and not Helios' light. Even though they did compare those two speeds later in the conclusion, but let's let them be a little sloppy for a moment. Moving on to experience. Asura has lived and fought much longer and always had control of his rage, so no shit Asura takes this. For versatility, it makes sense that Kratos would have the edge with his different weapons and his time-related abilities. Asura really only punches and shoots blasts of mantra. He can also resist a time stop, but they say since the time stop still affects Asura before Asura was able to break out of it, that Chakravartin's time stop was just worse than Kratos's. That to me is a giant leap in logic, but I don't think it would make a difference based on how they calced power. Also claiming that Kratos absorbing the green orbs with the Blade of Olympus should also imply that he can drain mantra makes sense, but for Asura's sake, he has so many souls in his body that I think it would take way too long for that to be a reliable win con. Even though people can test this idea heavily, I still think it should be applicable to some degree, just not the degree they show in the episode. They also say that Asura in the manga could regenerate immediately, but it's not used as canon, and even if they did, Asura in the manga could be countered by having his body parts separated, so it wouldn't make that much of a difference. Read the black boxes, people. They explain a lot. Asura's power was scaled to Chakravartin's golden statue, with the statue itself getting its size by comparing it to the galaxy right next to the statue in that shot, giving Asura a power level far above what I thought it would be. Kratos' power was calculated using Ragnarok shaking the roots of Yggdrasil, with them getting Kratos to about 100 times stronger than Asura based on this feat because Freyr could hold Ragnarok back and Kratos should be stronger than him. They even lowballed Kratos and still got a number way higher than Asura's. Here's where people get mad though. Their statement goes against what Corey Balrog says, but they already established that if developer statements go against the game's continuity, they won't use it. So again, I'm fine with this logic. Saying Ragnarok is comparable to the Titans though is weird, since I believe Ragnarok is way more powerful. In their constant statements of them trying to say, "See, Kratos does scale this high," is a bit annoying. But their biggest sin is that they don't talk about Asura's accelerated development. Chakravartin knocked Asura down to his weakest form and bodied him, only for Asura to power up within the fight and overpower the god while again being in his weakest state. Sure, I don't think this should give Asura the win, but it should have been mentioned. After the conclusion, we get an alternate ending, and if their idea is that this would make Asura's defeat sting a little bit less to diehard Asura's Wrath fans, I think they greatly misjudged the situation. This feels more like damage control than anything else, and it doesn't even look that good. In my reaction, I said it's a better ending, but what I meant by that is the idea of it. The idea of Kratos being with his daughter again is better than Asura losing and leaving Mithra. This episode ended up being a mess, but I don't think it's horrible. I'm ranking it a C-. One alright analysis, one great analysis, a good-looking but bad fight, and a conclusion that leaves a lot to be desired. The last thing I want to bring up is how exhausted this matchup has made me. This waiting period has been my least favorite in the show's history, with people being very toxic and rude over multiple different platforms. Until the end of the year when I do my yearly rankings, I'm done talking about this matchup or debating it. It's lost all of its fun for me. I hope people can continue debating this in a healthy way, but for me, I just need to move on with my life. Let's try not to let this be a negative end though. This episode isn't all bad, and I hope anyone who enjoyed it really got something out of it. Plus, I predicted it right, so my current record now stands at 150 right and 44 wrong. Throughout everything though, let's continue to be positive and believe that Death Battle will be better in the future. Take care everyone, and have a wonderful day.